Sometimes the most profound moments happen when we least expect them. What if I told you that a single act of kindness on an airplane could completely change two lives forever? This is the story of James, a single father who thought he was invisible to the world until one woman in first class proved him wrong in the most unexpected way. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the people who judge us the least are complete strangers, and why one conversation at 30,000 feet can be worth more than years of therapy. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or judged by your circumstances, this story will remind you that your worth isn't determined by the price of your plane ticket. Stay with me, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity and maybe even change how you see the world around you. James Parker had been awake since 4 in the morning, not by choice, but because his 7-year-old daughter Emma had been coughing all night. As a single father working 2 jobs just to make ends meet, sleepless nights had become his norm. But today was different. Today was the day he had been dreading for weeks. He stood in their small apartment kitchen, making Emma's breakfast with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion and anxiety. The morning light filtered through their old windows, casting shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Emma sat at their second-hand table, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized chair, watching her father with those intelligent brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Daddy, are you nervous about flying?" Emma asked, her voice still hoarse from the night's coughing. James paused, the spoon halfway to her bowl of oatmeal. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that he wasn't just nervous about flying, but about everything? About walking into that corporate office in Chicago, where he'd be interviewing for a position that could change their lives. About leaving her with Mrs. Rodriguez next door for 3 days. About the plane ticket that had cost him his entire emergency fund and then some. "A little bit, sweetheart," he admitted, sitting down across from her. "But sometimes we have to do things that scare us, if we want good things to happen." Emma nodded solemnly, as if she understood the weight of adult responsibilities far better than any child should. "Like when I had to get my shots last month." Exactly like that. He reached across and smoothed her hair. "Mrs. Rodriguez will take good care of you, and I'll call you every night before bedtime." The truth was, James hadn't been on an airplane since his honeymoon 8 years ago. Back then, he and Sarah had splurged on business-class tickets to Hawaii, laughing about how they'd eat ramen noodles for months to pay for it. Now, counting every penny twice before spending it, even the economy ticket felt like an insurmountable luxury. 3 hours later, James stood in the security line at Denver International Airport, clutching his boarding pass and ID with sweaty palms. His only good suit hung a bit loose on his frame. He'd lost weight over the past year, stress and irregular meals taking their toll. The backpack slung over his shoulder contained everything he could afford to bring: a change of clothes, his interview documents, and a small framed photo of Emma that he carried everywhere. Around him, business travelers moved with practiced efficiency, their expensive luggage and confident demeanor a stark contrast to his obvious nervousness. A woman in a pristine white blazer ahead of him tapped impatiently on her phone, her designer heels clicking against the floor. A man in a tailored suit behind him spoke loudly into his Bluetooth headset about closing million-dollar deals. James felt like an imposter in this world of frequent flyers and expense accounts. His reflection in the glass windows showed a man who looked older than his 32 years, worry lines etched around his eyes, shoulders perpetually tense from carrying invisible burdens. When he finally reached his gate, the reality of his situation hit him full force. The departure board showed his flight to Chicago, and the gate area was divided into clear social strata. First-class passengers lounged in leather chairs near the windows, sipping coffee from real mugs while typing on MacBooks. Business-class travelers stood in small groups, their conversations peppered with industry jargon and vacation plans. And then there was everyone else, crowded into the remaining seats, some sleeping across multiple chairs, others counting snacks from vending machines to make them last the journey. James found an empty seat in the back corner, as far from the first-class area as possible. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong here, that somehow airport security would realize their mistake and escort him out. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez. "Emma ate all her lunch and is helping me water plants. Don't worry, mijo. Focus on your interview." The boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, and James watched as the social hierarchy played out in real time. First class was called first, of course, and he observed as well-dressed passengers glided past him toward the gate. Then, business class. Their confident strides, speaking of lives lived in comfort zones he could barely imagine. When they finally called his boarding group, the last one, James joined the shuffle of economy passengers. The line moved slowly, and he found himself directly behind a family with 3 young children. The mother looked exhausted, juggling a crying baby while trying to keep her toddler from running away. The father carried car seats and diaper bags, both parents moving with the weary efficiency of people accustomed to traveling with limited resources. "Sir, boarding pass, please." "Indeed." The gate agent's voice was professionally neutral, but James caught the slight glance at his worn backpack and scuffed shoes. He handed over his boarding pass, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Parker. Enjoy your flight." As he walked down the jet bridge, James practiced the breathing exercises his grief counselor had taught him after Sarah died. In through the nose, out through the mouth. "You belong here," he told himself. "You earned this opportunity." The airplane interior was a study in contrasts. As he passed through first class, he glimpsed wide leather seats that looked more like recliners, passengers already being offered champagne and warm towels. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with genuine smiles, addressing each passenger by name. Business class was nearly as impressive, with seats that appeared to convert into beds and passengers already settled in with noise-cancelling headphones and tablets. James quickened his pace, feeling like an intruder in this world of comfort and luxury. The economy section was a different universe entirely. Narrow seats packed close together, overhead bins already overflowing, despite the plane being only half boarded. James found his assigned seat, 34F, a middle seat near the back of the plane, and discovered that the man in the aisle seat had already claimed both armrests and was spreading his belongings onto James's seat. "Excuse me," James said quietly. "I think this is my seat." The man looked up with irritation, glanced at James's boarding pass, and grudgingly moved his jacket. "Great, another middle seat victim," he muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. James squeezed into his seat, immediately feeling claustrophobic. The woman by the window was already asleep, her head lolling against the wall, and the man in the aisle seat had returned to his aggressive typing on a laptop that encroached well into James's space. As more passengers filed past, James caught fragments of conversations that made his stomach tighten, a couple discussing their vacation home in Aspen, a businessman complaining about being stuck in economy because his assistant had booked too late, a teenager asking her mother if they could upgrade to first class just this once. He pulled out his phone and looked at the photo of Emma on his lock screen. She was smiling in her school picture, missing her front teeth, her hair in the slightly lopsided ponytails that were his signature parenting style. This job opportunity, if he got it, would mean better insurance for her, maybe even enough money to move to a better school district. It would mean not having to choose between buying her new shoes and paying the electric bill. The plane began to taxi, and James gripped the armrests as they picked up speed. It had been so long since he'd flown that he'd forgotten the sensation of takeoff, the way your stomach drops as the ground falls away beneath you. As they climbed, he pressed his face to the small portion of window he could see past the sleeping woman, watching Denver shrink below them. Somewhere over Kansas, the flight attendants began drink service. James watched as they started in first class, taking individual orders and serving drinks in actual glassware. In business class, they offered multiple options and seemed to have unlimited time for small talk with passengers. By the time they reached economy, the service had become efficiently impersonal. "Coffee, tea, or soda?" the flight attendant asked each row in rapid succession. When she reached James's row, he asked for water, grateful it was free. "Cup or bottle?" she asked, already reaching for the next passenger. "Cup is fine." He didn't want to seem demanding by asking for a whole bottle. As she handed him a plastic cup half filled with lukewarm water, James couldn't help but notice the difference from what he'd observed in first class. No warm nuts, no real glasses, no genuine smiles. Just efficiency and volume. The man next to him was now on his third complimentary drink, having charmed the flight attendant into extra alcohol. "This is nothing compared to flying business," he announced to no one in particular. "Last month I flew to London in a pod that converted to a fully flat bed. This," he gestured around the economy cabin, "is like riding a bus with wings." James sipped his water and tried to ignore the commentary. He opened the folder containing his interview materials, reviewing his notes one more time. The position was for a senior project manager at a construction firm, a role that would nearly double his current income. The phone interview had gone well enough to warrant flying him out for a face-to-face meeting. He thought about the previous night when he'd practiced his interview answers while Emma colored at the kitchen table. She'd been his practice audience, asking him questions like, "Daddy, why do you want this job?" His honest answer, "Because I want to give you the life you deserve," wouldn't work in a corporate setting, but it was the truest thing he could say. Halfway through the flight, James excused himself to use the restroom. The journey down the narrow aisle was like navigating an obstacle course of extended legs, bulging seat-back pockets, and passengers who seemed determined to claim every inch of space around them. As he made his way back to his seat, something unexpected happened. Near the front of the plane, a woman in first class looked up from her tablet and made direct eye contact with him. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Instead of the dismissive glance he'd grown accustomed to, she offered him a genuine smile. It was such a small gesture, but it caught James off guard. He found himself smiling back instinctively before continuing to his seat. 20 minutes later, as he was reviewing his resume for the dozenth time, a flight attendant approached his row. She was one of the first-class attendants, impeccably groomed and moving with the confident grace of someone accustomed to serving VIP passengers. "Mr. Parker," she said quietly, leaning down to speak directly to him. James looked up, confused. "Yes? Would you mind coming with me for a moment? There's been a seating change." His heart sank. This was it. They'd realized he didn't belong on this plane, or there was some problem with his ticket. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all. If you could just gather your belongings and follow me." The aisle seat passenger looked up with interest, no doubt relieved at the prospect of having more space. James stuffed his papers back into his backpack, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he somehow been booked on the wrong flight? Was there an issue with his payment? The flight attendant led him forward through the cabin, past business class, past the curtain that separated the different worlds of air travel. James's confusion deepened as they entered first class, where passengers looked up with mild curiosity at the unusual sight of someone being escorted forward rather than back. "Here we are," the flight attendant said, stopping at seat 2A, a window seat in the first row of first class. "Your new seat." James stared at the leather chair, which was larger than some recliners he'd seen in furniture stores. "I think there's been a mistake. My ticket is for economy." "No mistake," said a familiar voice. James turned to see the woman who had smiled at him earlier. She was seated across the aisle in 2B, her tablet closed now, giving him her full attention. "I asked them to move you up here." I don't understand. The flight attendant gestured for him to sit down. The passenger in 2B purchased an upgrade for you. All the paperwork is handled. Can I get you something to drink? Maybe some champagne to celebrate? James sank into the seat, overwhelmed by its comfort and the surreal nature of the situation. Water is fine. I really don't understand what's happening. After the flight attendant left, the woman turned to face him fully. Up close, she had the kind of face that spoke of both intelligence and compassion, with laugh lines around her eyes and an openness in her expression that put him slightly at ease. "I'm Catherine Morrison," she said, extending her hand. "And you look like someone who's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." James shook her hand, still bewildered. "James Parker. And I am, but why did you do this? You don't even know me." Catherine smiled, an expression that seemed to carry decades of experience and wisdom. "Sometimes that's exactly why we should help someone. Tell me, James Parker, what's taking you to Chicago?" Something in her tone, not prying but genuinely interested, made James want to answer honestly. "A job interview. It could change everything for my daughter and me, but I'm terrified I'm going to mess it up." "What kind of work?" "Construction project management. I've been working 2 jobs since my wife died, trying to keep our heads above water. This position would, well, it would mean we could actually breathe again." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "How old is your daughter?" 7. Emma. "She's the strongest person I know, but she shouldn't have to be. She shouldn't have to worry about whether Daddy can afford new school clothes or if we'll have to move apartments again." The words came out in a rush, as if Catherine's kindness had unlocked something he'd been holding tightly inside. "And you've been doing this alone. For 3 years now. Sarah, my wife, she died in a car accident when Emma was 4. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water, and other days I feel like I'm drowning completely." The flight attendant returned with his water, served in an actual glass with ice and a slice of lemon. She also brought a plate of warm nuts and a small menu. "We'll be serving lunch in about an hour, Mr. Parker. Is there anything else I can get you?" After she left, Catherine was quiet for a moment, studying James with those perceptive eyes. "You know what I see when I look at you." James braced himself for pity or platitudes about how strong he was, the kind of empty comfort he'd grown tired of hearing. "I see a man who's been judging himself far more harshly than anyone else ever could. You walked onto this plane convinced you didn't belong here, didn't you?" The accuracy of her observation took his breath away. "How did you—" "Because I've been where you are. Not the same circumstances, but that feeling of being an imposter, of waiting for someone to figure out you don't belong in whatever room you're in. 25 years ago, I was a single mother sitting in the back of airplanes, wondering if I was fooling myself, thinking I could build something better." James felt a flutter of hope, mixed with disbelief. "What happened?" "Someone saw me struggling and decided to help. Not with money or charity, with opportunity and belief. It changed the trajectory of my entire life." Catherine pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of a young woman in a graduation cap and gown. "That's my daughter, Rachel. She graduated from medical school last year. She's doing her residency in pediatric oncology. She's beautiful. You must be incredibly proud." "I am. But more than that, I'm grateful. Grateful for the stranger who saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself, and grateful that I've been in a position to pay that forward many times over." The lunch service began, and James experienced his first taste of first-class dining at 35,000 feet, real silverware, multiple courses, and a flight attendant who knew his name and seemed genuinely interested in ensuring his comfort. But more nourishing than the food was the conversation with Catherine. She told him about her journey from struggling single mother to successful business owner. She'd started with a small catering company, working 18-hour days while her daughter was in school, building it slowly into a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire. Along the way, she'd made it her mission to help other people, particularly single parents, find their footing. "I started a foundation 15 years ago," she explained over dessert. "We provide micro-loans and mentorship to single parents starting businesses or pursuing education. But beyond that, we try to offer something that's often in shorter supply than money." "What's that?" "Belief. The kind of unwavering belief that tells someone they're capable of more than they think they are." James felt something shifting inside him, a loosening of the tight knot of anxiety he'd carried for so long. "Why me, though? Why today?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the clouds below. "Do you believe in signs, James?" "I don't know. Maybe. Today is the 3rd anniversary of my own mother's death. She was the one who taught me that kindness isn't something you do when it's convenient. It's something you do especially when it's not. I was planning to spend this flight wallowing in grief and memory." She turned back to him with a slight smile. "Instead, I got to meet someone who reminded me why her lessons matter. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. But I'm not sorry I met you today. Tell me about this interview tomorrow." "What company?" James told her about Morrison and Associates, a mid-sized construction firm that specialized in commercial development. Catherine listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about his experience and qualifications. "You know," she said after he'd finished describing the position, "I've worked with Morrison and Associates on several projects. They built 3 of my restaurant locations. They're good people. They value integrity and hard work over fancy degrees and connections." "Really, that's encouraging to hear. James, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You're going to walk into that interview tomorrow, and you're going to doubt yourself. You're going to look around their office and think you don't belong there. But I need you to remember something. They called you. Out of hundreds of applicants, they chose to bring you in. They saw something in your resume, in your phone interview, that made them want to meet you in person." The plane began its descent into Chicago, and James felt a mixture of gratitude and disbelief at how much his day had changed. Catherine had given him more than a comfortable seat. She'd given him perspective. "I have a proposition for you," Catherine said, as they prepared for landing. "After your interview tomorrow, I'd like you to come have coffee with me. There's something I want to discuss with you." "Of course, I owe you dinner at least." "You don't owe me anything, but I think we might be able to help each other." As the plane touched down at O'Hare, James felt different than he had when they'd taken off from Denver, not just because of the first-class treatment, but because of the reminder that kindness still existed in the world, that there were people who chose to lift others up rather than keep them down. Catherine gave him her business card before they disembarked. "Text me after your interview. And James, trust yourself tomorrow. You're exactly who they're looking for." The next morning, James stood outside the Morrison and Associates building in downtown Chicago, wearing his one good suit and carrying the confidence Catherine had helped him find. The building was impressive, glass and steel reaching toward the sky. But instead of feeling intimidated, he felt prepared. The interview lasted 3 hours. They met with the hiring manager, the department head, and finally with Robert Morrison himself, the company's founder. Each conversation built on the last, and James found himself relaxing into the discussion, drawing on his years of experience and his natural problem-solving abilities. "I have to be honest with you, James," Robert Morrison said at the end of their meeting. "We've interviewed a lot of candidates for this position, people with fancier degrees, people with connections in the industry, but you have something that can't be taught." "What's that?" "Hunger. Not for money or status, but for the opportunity to build something meaningful. That's what this company was founded on, and it's what we look for in every person we bring onto our team." James walked out of the building 2 hours later with a job offer that exceeded his wildest expectations. Not just the salary, though that was life-changing, but the benefits, the growth opportunities, and the sense that he'd found a place where his values aligned with the company's mission. He called Emma first, hearing her shriek of joy when he told her they could stay in their apartment, that she wouldn't have to change schools, that Daddy had found a job that would let them breathe again. Then he texted Catherine, "Interview went better than I could have imagined. Thank you for helping me believe in myself. Coffee at 4. They met at a small cafe near Catherine's hotel, and she listened with evident satisfaction as James recounted his successful interview. "I knew it," she said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. "Some people are meant for great things. They just need someone to help them see it. Now tell me about this proposition you mentioned." Catherine's expression grew more serious. "I meant what I said about my foundation. We're always looking for success stories, people who have overcome significant challenges and can serve as mentors to others who are struggling. I'd like you to consider becoming one of our ambassadors." "Me? But I haven't even started the new job yet." "James, you've been a single father for 3 years, working 2 jobs, keeping your family together, and still finding the strength to pursue better opportunities. You think that's not worth sharing?" Over the next hour, Catherine outlined her vision. The foundation operated mentorship programs in 12 cities, pairing successful professionals with single parents who were trying to build better lives for their families. As an ambassador, James would share his story, offer guidance, and help identify other people who could benefit from the foundation's support. "The position comes with a small stipend," Catherine explained, "but more importantly, it gives you a platform to ensure that what happened to you today, someone believing in you when you couldn't believe in yourself, happens for other people." James thought about all the times over the past 3 years when he'd felt completely alone, when the weight of responsibility had seemed unbearable. The idea that he could help other parents navigate those same challenges filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "How soon can I start?" 6 months later, James was settling into his new role at Morrison & Associates and had already spoken at 3 foundation events. His story, the single father who went from economy to first class, literally and figuratively, had become one of the foundation's most requested presentations. But the real change wasn't in his bank account or his job title. It was in how he saw himself and his place in the world. Emma had noticed it too. "Daddy, you smile different now," she said one evening as they walked home from her soccer practice, a luxury they could now afford. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Before, you smiled like you were pretending to be happy. Now you smile like you really are happy." James stopped walking and knelt down to her level. "You know what made the difference?" "What?" "Learning that there are people in the world who want to help, not because they have to, but because they choose to. And understanding that someday, when we're able to, we get to be those people for someone else." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Like when I helped Tommy with his math homework because he was crying. Exactly like that." A year later, James received a text from Catherine. "Turn on Channel 7 News at 6 p.m. tonight, trust me." He and Emma settled on their couch, a new one. The first piece of furniture James had bought rather than found second-hand, and watched as the local news ran a feature story about Catherine's foundation. The segment highlighted several success stories, including a single mother who had started a successful catering business and a divorced father who had gone back to school to become a teacher. And then James saw himself on screen, speaking at a foundation event 6 months earlier. The camera captured him mid-sentence, gesturing animatedly as he told his story to an audience of other single parents. "That's you, Daddy," Emma shouted, pointing at the screen. "Sometimes," his televised self was saying, "the most important thing someone can give you isn't money or opportunity. It's the reminder that you're worthy of both. A stranger on an airplane taught me that, and now I get to pay it forward every day." The segment ended with Catherine speaking directly to the camera. We believe that everyone deserves a first-class life, not because of their circumstances, but despite them. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to see potential where others see problems. James's phone began buzzing with texts from friends and colleagues who had seen the broadcast. But the message that meant the most came from Catherine herself. Proud of the man you've become. Your wife would be too. That night, after Emma was asleep, James sat in his home office, another luxury he was still getting used to, and wrote in the journal his grief counselor had encouraged him to keep. He wrote about the airplane, about Catherine, about how a single act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that had transformed not just his life, but Emma's future. But mostly, he wrote about the lesson he'd learned at 35,000 feet. That our worth isn't determined by where we sit on the airplane of life, but by how we treat the people sitting around us. Sometimes the person in first class got there through privilege and luck. But sometimes they got there through struggle and perseverance, and they remember what it felt like to sit in the back. The best ones, James had learned, are the ones who use their first-class seat not as a destination, but as a launching pad to lift others up. 3 years after that transformative flight, James stood in the Denver airport once again, this time boarding a plane to speak at a conference in Seattle about mentorship and second chances. As he made his way to his seat, business class this time, paid for by the speaking engagement, he noticed a young woman sitting alone in the economy section. She was probably in her mid-20s, wearing scrubs that suggested she worked in healthcare, and she had the telltale signs of someone traveling on a tight budget. A worn backpack instead of luggage, a paperback book instead of a tablet, and that particular combination of determination and anxiety that James recognized all too well. As he settled into his seat, James thought about Catherine's words from that day, 3 years ago. Kindness isn't something you do when it's convenient. It's something you do especially when it's not. He pressed the call button and waited for the flight attendant to approach. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" "I'd like to purchase an upgrade for someone," James said, pulling out his wallet. "The young woman in 23F. Can you arrange for her to be moved up here?" The flight attendant looked surprised but nodded. "Of course. That's very generous of you." As James watched the confused but grateful young woman being escorted to the empty seat beside him, he felt the particular satisfaction that comes from completing a circle. This was how kindness worked. Not as a single act, but as a continuous loop of people lifting each other up. "Hi," he said, as she settled into her seat, still looking bewildered by her change in fortune. "I'm James, and you look like someone who's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders." She smiled, and in that smile, James saw the same mixture of hope and exhaustion that Catherine must have seen in him 3 years ago. "I'm Sarah," she said, "and I am. But why did you do this?" "You don't even know me." James smiled back, hearing an echo of his own words from years before. "Sometimes that's exactly why we should help someone. Tell me, Sarah, what's taking you to Seattle?" And as the plane lifted off into the sky, James began the conversation that would remind this young woman, and himself, that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives begin with a stranger's simple choice to see our worth when we can't see it ourselves. Because that's the thing about first-class treatment. It's not really about the seat you're sitting in. It's about the recognition that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and kindness, regardless of their circumstances. And sometimes it takes sitting in first class to remember that the real luxury isn't the leather seats or the champagne. It's the opportunity to lift someone else up to sit beside you. The woman Catherine had helped that day wasn't just James Parker, single father struggling to make ends meet. She had helped a future mentor, a foundation ambassador, a man who would go on to touch hundreds of lives through his work and his story. And now, as James watched Sarah's face light up with hope as she talked about her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, he realized that this was how the world changed. One first-class upgrade at a time, one conversation at a time, one person choosing to believe in another when they couldn't believe in themselves. Sometimes the most important journey isn't the one that takes you from point A to point B. Sometimes it's the journey that takes you from who you were to who you're meant to become. And sometimes that journey begins with a stranger in first class who sees something in you that you can't yet see in yourself. As the plane soared through the clouds towards Seattle, James smiled to himself, knowing that somewhere below, Emma was probably helping a classmate with homework, carrying forward the lessons about kindness and generosity that had transformed their lives. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning, because that's the beautiful thing about kindness. It doesn't have an ending. It just keeps going, from one person to the next, creating an endless chain of moments where someone chooses to see the best in a stranger, and in doing so, helps them become the best version of themselves. And that, James thought, as he listened to Sarah talk about her dreams, was the most first-class experience of all.